Both engines died at 40,000 feet. Silence. Screams. Then air traffic control heard a voice on the radio, small, steady, unshaken. A 12-year-old girl. Call sign, Raptor. Her father, a legendary test pilot, had been dead for 2 years. But today, his training was about to save 211 lives. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maya Coleman was in seat 22C, forehead against the window, watching the wing lights blink against a sky gone the color of a fresh bruise, when the world went quiet in a way it was never supposed to go quiet. 1 second there was the deep, steady thrum of 2 Rolls-Royce turbofans doing the invisible work of holding 211 people above the earth. The next second, there was nothing. No hum. No vibration. Just wind noise, suddenly enormous, rushing past the fuselage like the airplane itself had started to whisper. The cabin lights flickered and died, then flared back weak and amber on emergency power. Somewhere behind her, a coffee cup hit the floor. A man 2 rows up said, too loudly, "Did we just lose power?" And nobody answered him, because nobody wanted to say yes out loud. Maya's stomach didn't drop from fear first. It dropped from recognition. Dual engine flameout. The words arrived in her head fully formed, in her father's voice, the way vocabulary arrives when you've heard it 1,000 times before you ever needed it. Her hands found the armrests and gripped them white-knuckled, but underneath the fear, something colder and steadier was already running, a checklist, worn smooth from repetition, laid down years before she understood why he was so insistent she memorize it. Her father had been Colonel Ray Coleman, call sign Raptor, one of the Air Force's most decorated experimental test pilots, the kind of man whose photo hung in ready rooms, whose name got said with a particular reverence by younger pilots who'd never met him. He died 18 months ago, testing a next-generation airframe that suffered a catastrophic control failure at altitude. The investigation board called it a combination of factors. Maya's mother called it the day the house went quiet forever. Maya didn't call it anything. She just stopped talking about airplanes altogether, packed away every model kit and flight manual, and tried, with the singular determination of a grieving 11-year-old, to become a girl who had never cared about flying at all. It hadn't worked, not completely, because you cannot unlearn 6 years of training simply by refusing to think about it. It started when she was 6, in the garage of their house outside Edwards Air Force Base, where her father had built a home flight simulator that was nothing like a toy, a real yoke salvaged from a decommissioned trainer, real avionics software, a setup precise enough that instructors he knew used to come by just to see it. He hadn't built it to entertain her. He'd built it because a pediatric assessment, requested almost as a joke after she beat every adult at a spatial reasoning game at a base picnic, came back with numbers that made her father go very quiet and very serious. She processes multiple moving variables faster than most trained pilots, the specialist had told him. That's not something you teach. That's wiring. Then we don't waste it, her father said. He trained her the way the Air Force trained its own, systems, procedures, checklists, emergency drills repeated until they stopped being information and became instinct. He was especially obsessive about engine failures, because in his world, engines failing wasn't hypothetical. He'd lost one himself once, mid-test, and walked away only because he'd rehearsed the response so many times his hands moved before his fear caught up with him. Anybody can fly when it's working, Maya Bird, he used to say, killing power on the simulator without warning just to watch what she'd do. I need you to know what to do when it isn't. By the time she was 10, she had logged more hours in that simulator than some licensed private pilots log in real aircraft in their first 2 years of flying, plus a scattering of real stick time in a friend's Cessna at a grass strip outside town, always with her father in the seat beside her, always unofficial, always a secret between the two of them that felt less like rule-breaking and more like a gift only he understood how to give. He was careful about what he taught her, and in what order. First came the basics anyone learns: attitude, airspeed, the 4 forces balanced against each other in a way that felt, once you understood it, almost like common sense. Then came the harder things, how weather actually behaves instead of how the textbook describes it, how to read the subtle tremor in an engine's pitch before a gauge ever confirms something is wrong, how to make a decision in 3 seconds that a checklist would take 3 minutes to walk through properly. But he came back, again and again, obsessively, to engine failures. Full failures, partial failures, single engine failures, dual failures, failures at altitude and failures on climb out where there was no time to think at all. He would sit beside her in the garage simulator and, without any warning, silently reach over and pull both throttles to idle, then say nothing, just watch to see what her hands did in the silence that followed. "Why do you only ever practice this one?" she'd asked him once, 8 years old and irritated after her third dead stick landing of the evening. "Because it's the one that doesn't forgive you for hesitating," he'd said. "A radio failure, you can work around. A single system going down, you've got backups. But when the engines go quiet, the clock starts and it doesn't stop, and the only thing standing between you and the ground is whatever's already in your hands before you have time to be afraid. I need that in your hands, Maya Bird. Not in your head. In your hands." She hadn't understood, not really, not until years later, sitting in a cockpit at 39,000 feet with no engines and 2 adults with far more flight hours than her fighting a silence her father had spent 6 years teaching her not to fear. After he died, she buried all of it. And for 18 months, it stayed buried. Until row 22, seat C, at 40,000 feet, with both engines gone. The captain's voice came over the intercom, tight and careful. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We've had an issue with both engines and we are working the problem. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. We'll update you as soon as we can." Working the problem was the kind of phrase Maya's father used to warn her about, technically true, deliberately calm, designed to buy time rather than convey the full truth, because 200 people panicking at once was its own emergency. She understood exactly why the captain said it. She also understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than the silence outside, that, working the problem, meant they didn't have a solution yet. She unbuckled and stood before she'd consciously decided to. "Honey, sit down," said the woman beside her, more startled than annoyed. "I need to see something," Maya said, and moved into the aisle before anyone could stop her. A flight attendant intercepted her almost immediately, young, composed on the surface, but with eyes that gave away just how badly this flight had gone off script. His name tag read Devon. "Miss, please, back to your seat." "How long ago did the engines flame out?" Maya asked, keeping her voice low and level, the way her father had trained her to speak under pressure. "Quiet carries more authority than loud," he used to say. "Panic is loud, competence is quiet." Devon blinked. "What? Have they attempted a restart? Do you know if the APU came online? I need to know if the flight deck still has full hydraulics or if they're running on emergency battery only." The words came out of her steady and fast, and some part of her, the part still 11 years old and terrified, was distantly amazed at how calm she sounded. I don't know that." "Why does that matter to you?" "Because if they don't have the APU running, they're losing electrical and hydraulic power on a clock, and somebody up there needs to know there's a standard glide procedure that a lot of pilots never actually train hard enough on, because nobody thinks it'll happen to them." Maya's voice cracked on the last few words, the fear finally leaking through the training. "My dad was a test pilot. He taught me this. Please. I need to talk to whoever's flying this airplane." Devon looked at her, 12 years old, small, gripping the seat back beside her so hard her knuckles had gone white and utterly, unmistakably certain, and made a decision that would end up on every news channel in the country by morning. "Come with me. Fast." The cockpit was a portrait of trained, disciplined panic. Captain Elena Ruiz had both hands on the controls, her whole body angled forward with the tight economy of someone flying an airplane that no longer wanted to stay in the sky the normal way. First Officer James Comu had a laminated emergency checklist propped against the yoke, reading procedures aloud in a voice gone thin with adrenaline. "Confirmed negative response on restart attempt 3, current altitude 38,900, rate of descent approximately 1,700 feet per minute, Como was saying into the radio. Requesting immediate. Who is this? Ruiz snapped, catching the movement of Devon and Maya in her peripheral vision without taking her eyes off the instruments. Captain, she says she knows something about the restart procedure and about glide setup, Devon said. She wouldn't stop until I brought her. We don't have time for. Is your APU running, ma'am? Maya's voice, small and clear, cut cleanly through the noise of the cockpit. Ruiz's head snapped around for exactly 1 second, long enough to take in the child standing in her cockpit doorway at nearly 39,000 feet with no engines. The APU's running. Who are you? Then you have full electrical and full hydraulics. That's good, that's really good, Maya said, the words tumbling faster now, urgency overtaking hesitation. My dad used to tell me pilots psychologically fixate on the engines when this happens, they keep trying to get the engines back instead of treating the glide itself as the actual emergency. Are you flying best glide speed right now? Como looked up sharply, startled. That's exactly what the manual says. Word for word almost. 278 knots, Ruiz said, some instinct overriding her disbelief and answering the child's question the way you answer any voice offering something useful in a crisis. Clean configuration, gear and flaps up. Good, don't extend anything until you're committed to a landing site, it costs you glide distance you can't get back, Maya said. Do you have a field and range? Working it now, Como said, frustration sharpening his tone. We might be short of Reno by a wide margin, the terrain out here isn't giving us many options, and the frequency is jammed. Maya's stomach turned over. Short of Reno with no engines, over mountainous terrain, was not a small problem. Has anyone given ATC your exact numbers, altitude, airspeed, glide ratio, not just, we've got an emergency? We've been trying, Como said. Every controller in 3 sectors is trying to clear traffic around us and the channel's a mess. Give me the radio, Maya said. Absolutely not, Ruiz said automatically, flying. Captain, I'm not asking you to take your hands off the controls, I'm asking you to let me handle the ground so you too can fly the plane. Maya's hands were shaking now, visibly, and she let them. Her father had told her that fear was fine, fear was information, not a stop sign. My dad's call sign was Raptor. He drilled radio discipline into me since I was 7 years old. Please. Let me help you. For a fraction of a second, the only sound in the cockpit was the strange, wrong quiet of an airliner with no engines, just wind tearing over the fuselage at nearly 300 knots, a sound that should have been buried under turbine roar and instead was horribly, nakedly audible. Do it, Ruiz said. Devon, headset. Now. Maya's voice went out over the emergency frequency, high and unmistakably a child's, into a control room that had no idea what it was about to hear. Sector Control, this is Skyline Flight, transmitting for the flight crew. Dual engine flameout, flight level 389er, current airspeed 278 knots, descending approximately 1,700 feet per minute. Requesting immediate glide range calculation and nearest suitable landing surface prioritizing runway length. Silence on the frequency, long enough that Maya's heart hammered twice against her ribs while she wondered if the transmission had even gone through, then, Skyline Flight, confirm, who is transmitting? This is Skyline Flight, transmitting for the flight deck, Maya repeated, steadier now, because saying the numbers out loud had settled something jittering in her chest. Both pilots are fully occupied flying the aircraft. I need updated landing options. Please advise. A new voice cut in, older, sharper, clearly a supervisor who'd just been told something impossible was happening on this channel. Skyline Flight, this is Sector Supervisor Grant Holloway. Is there a child on this frequency? Ruiz, without looking away from her panel, said flatly, confirmed, and she's the most useful person in this cockpit right now, so let her work, Holloway. A short pause. Then, all business, copy that. Skyline Flight, stand by, recalculating your glide envelope with current wind data. You've got Deer Valley Regional, 6,200 feet of runway, 21 miles off your nose, bearing 082. That's your best shot. Reno's outside safe glide margin at your current sync rate. Copy Deer Valley, 6,200 feet, 21 miles, 082, Maya read back, the rhythm of it living in her spine the way her father had drilled it in 1,000 simulator sessions. Captain, you copy that? Copy, Ruiz said, banking the aircraft, slow and heavy without thrust to help the turn. Maya, that's your name. Maya. Maya, I need you as our voice for the rest of this. Komu and I are fully occupied flying. Can you keep talking to the ground for us? Yes, Captain. What followed were the longest 19 minutes of Maya Coleman's life, and of 210 other people's lives crowded into the fuselage behind her. Stripped of engine thrust, the aircraft had become, in every practical sense, an enormous glider, and gliders, her father used to remind her, forgive nothing. Every foot of altitude was a withdrawal from an account that would never see another deposit, and every decision from here to the runway had to be paid for out of a balance that was shrinking by the second. Winds at Deer Valley? Maya asked the frequency. 210 at 14, gusting 22, Holloway answered. That's a heavy crosswind on runway 26, Maya said, half to the radio, half to herself, running the numbers her father had once made her calculate against a stopwatch with no calculator allowed. Captain, if you can make runway 35 work for length, it'll cut that crosswind component almost in half, better for a flapless, no-power touchdown. Komu's head turned toward her sharply. She's right. 3.5 shorter, but it's workable if we nail the approach speed exactly. We're not getting flaps without burning altitude we can't spare on hydraulic extension, Ruiz said, half to herself, adjusting. We land this thing fast, gear down at the last safe second, and we don't get a second attempt. Copy, amending clearance, runway 35 Deer Valley, cleared for emergency landing, all other traffic held, Holloway's voice crackled back. Fire and rescue rolling now. Skyline Flight, you're doing this exactly right. Keep talking to us. Maya kept talking. She read back altitude call-outs as Komu called them. She relayed requests for field elevation, obstruction data, surface condition, anything that might shave a fraction of risk off an approach that had no margin left to spare. She did not cry, though the weight of 211 lives sat on her narrow shoulders like something physical, because her father's voice was steady in her head, as clear as if he were crouched beside her the way he used to crouch beside the simulator chair in that garage that didn't exist anymore in any way that mattered. Fear doesn't mean stop, Maya Bird. Fear means you understand what's at stake. Panic is the only thing that actually kills people. So feel it, and fly the airplane anyway. Back in the cabin, a retired airline mechanic named Walter Grimes sat in seat 9A, gripping his wife's hand so hard she'd later find bruises on her fingers. He had spent 31 years turning wrenches on exactly this type of aircraft, and he understood, better than almost anyone else on board, precisely how much trouble they were in. When the intercom crackled and Devon's voice came through, thin, trying hard to sound calm, asking everyone to remain seated and assuring them the crew was managing the situation, Walter had leaned toward his wife and said quietly, "That's a good crew up there. I can hear it in how steady he sounds. We're going to be all right." He didn't know, sitting there, that the reason the voice coming through the intercom moments later giving updated instructions to brace was a 12-year-old girl relaying numbers from a control tower 200 miles away. Nobody in the cabin knew. All they knew was that somewhere in the last 10 minutes, the tone in the aircraft had shifted from chaos to something that felt, unmistakably, like competence. People stopped screaming. People started praying, or gripping hands, or closing their eyes and simply breathing, because something about the calm, specific instructions coming from the flight deck made it feel possible, for the first time since the engines died, that they might actually survive this. 10,000 feet, Komu called. Field in sight. Through the windscreen, past the captain's shoulder, Maya could see it, a thin gray scar of runway carved into high desert scrubland, terrifyingly small from this altitude, already ringed by the distant flashing lights of emergency vehicles racing into position. Sector Control, field in sight, we are committed to the approach, Ruiz said, her voice gone tight and singular with concentration, all the spare bandwidth in her mind now devoted entirely to flying. Copy, Skyline flight, cleared to land runway 35, all emergency equipment standing by. You have this. You have this. 5,000 feet. 3,000. Without engines to modulate the descent, the airplane fell in a way that felt to Maya nothing like normal flight, silent, committed, no second chances built into the physics of it. She realized she had stopped breathing somewhere around 2,000 feet and forced her lungs to remember their job. 1,500 feet, gear coming down, Komu called, and the airframe shuddered as the landing gear dropped and locked, 3 green lights blooming across the panel like a small, stubborn promise. Runways coming up hot, brace yourselves back there, Ruiz said. Everybody hold on. Maya braced against the cockpit doorframe exactly the way Devon had shown her, watching the desert floor rush upward through the windscreen with a speed that seemed to swallow the whole world down into a single narrow strip of gray asphalt. 500 feet. 200. The runway threshold flashed beneath them. 50 feet. Ruiz flared the nose, bleeding off the last of their speed with nothing but wing and instinct to help her, no reverse thrust, no engines at all, only 130 tons of momentum and a lifetime of training standing between 211 people and disaster. The main gear struck the runway hard, harder than any ordinary landing, a jolt that rattled through the whole airframe and tore a collective gasp from the cabin, but it held. Ruiz stood on the brakes, Komu called out decreasing airspeed in a voice gone hoarse, and the airplane screamed down the runway trailing smoke from overheating tires, slowing, until at last, 400 feet from the end of the pavement, it shuddered to a stop. For one entire second, nobody in the cockpit moved. Then the cabin behind them erupted, the sound of 210 people realizing, all at once and together, that they were alive, that they would see the people they loved again, that the thing that had almost happened over the high desert that evening had not, in the end, happened at all. Maya slid down the cockpit doorframe until she was sitting on the floor, and finally let herself shake without trying to stop it. Hey! Ruiz twisted around in her seat, and for the first time since Maya had walked into the cockpit, the captain's professional composure cracked open into something warm, stunned, and entirely human. Hey! You did that. You understand me? We just glided a dead airliner onto a runway with a 12-year-old running our radios, and it worked because of you. My dad taught me, Maya whispered, tears finally spilling over now that there was nothing left to hold them back for. I just remembered what he taught me. Then your father, Komu said quietly, pulling off his headset with hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the engines died, just saved 211 people from a cockpit he was never even sitting in. The story broke before the runway lights had even finished flashing. Miracle landing after dual-engine failure, passengers described terror and survival. By the time the black box transcript leaked that evening, the headline had already shifted. 12-year-old guided pilots through emergency glide landing. By morning it had a name attached, and a call sign, and it was everywhere. Call sign Raptor, daughter of fallen test pilot Colonel helps save 211 lives. Reporters arrived at Deer Valley within hours, then at Maya's front door, then outside the base where her father had once been stationed and where his name was still spoken with reverence in the ready room he'd never see again. Old friends of her father's, men and women who'd flown beside him, who still remembered exactly where they were the day news of his crash came in, called Maya's mother in tears, saying the same thing over and over in different words. He would be so proud, he would be so unbelievably proud. Aviation safety boards opened formal reviews. Cable news anchors argued for an hour at a time about training standards and cockpit access and what, if anything, should change because of what had happened 39,000 feet above the Nevada desert. The questions were the ones that always arrive after something like this: how, why, was it right, should a child ever have been anywhere near that cockpit at all? At a press conference 2 days later, Maya sat between Captain Ruiz and an investigator from the safety board, wearing a small silver pin on her collar, her father's old squadron insignia, the only thing of his sheet taken out of the box since he died, and answered the hardest question herself, in a voice that had finally stopped shaking. "People keep asking if it was okay that I was in that cockpit," she said. "I don't know if it was okay. I know 2 pilots were doing everything right and running out of time and options, and I knew something that could help, and I said it instead of staying quiet in my seat. That's the whole story. I didn't land the plane. I didn't do anything magic. I just remembered what my dad taught me, and this time, I said it out loud." A reporter asked if she thought her father would be proud. Maya was quiet for a moment, looking down at the small tarnished pin on her collar, the last thing that still, faintly, smelled like him. "I think he'd say I did exactly what he trained me to do," she said finally. "Not because I'm special. Because he made sure I was ready. That's all training really is, getting ready for a day you hope never comes, so if it does come, you're not standing there with nothing." She looked up, past the cameras, past the microphones, towards some point only she could see. "He used to tell me fear doesn't go away. You just learn to fly through it anyway. I think that's what happened up there. I was terrified the whole time. I flew through it anyway. Somewhere, in a way that couldn't be proven or measured, only felt, Colonel Ray Coleman, callsign Raptor, was listening. And whatever else was true about that terrible, impossible flight, one thing was certain to everyone who watched his daughter answer that question: he was proud. He would always have been proud. That night, back home, Maya's mother sat on the edge of her bed the way she used to when Maya was small and afraid of thunderstorms, except this time it was Maya who reached over and took her mother's hand first. "I thought I put all of it away," Maya said quietly, staring at the ceiling. "The simulator, the checklists, all of it. I thought if I stopped thinking about flying, it would stop hurting so much that he was gone." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Your father used to say the same thing about grief that he said about flying," she said finally. "That you don't get rid of it. You just learn to carry it without it dragging you down. I think today you found out that everything he gave you was still there, waiting, whether you looked at it or not." "I was so scared, Mom." "I know, baby. He was scared too, every single time, in every airplane he ever tested. He told me that once. He said the difference between a good pilot and a reckless one wasn't the absence of fear. It was what you did with your hands while you were afraid." Her mother squeezed her fingers. "You flew through it. Just like him." Maya didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. For the first time in 18 months, the silence in the house didn't feel like something to run from. It felt, instead, like something her father had once described to her as the quiet after a good landing, the moment the wheels finally, gently, stop rolling, and everyone on board realizes, all at once, that they made it home.